Bart in Columbus on the C-Spire text line. Wait, Time Magazine is still in business? I thought magazines were from the 1900s. They sort of resurrected themselves, I believe. I actually subscribe to it, believe it or not, Bart. And there sometimes are reasonable articles. For the most part, it leans left, shall we say, and they're big time into climate change.
Well, you still have the big magazines. You just don't have the newsstands full of every little niche possible magazines.
Well, there are some. They just don't sell.
Well,
that's what I've seen at Barnes & Noble. Like, who buys that?
Don't you think that's what the T-Swift selection is about?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Please buy this magazine.
Oh, yeah,
we'll put her picture on the front. She sold all these albums, and I'm not a T-Swift fan, by the way.
It's Auditor Shad White on the program. So, I agree to some extent. And it is their job. It's actually to sell advertising, right?
That's right.
And you sell advertising by getting readership of your publication.
Yep.
So, I mean, that's the world, and I think there's some of that. I was just glad that she's a reasonably normal person, at least. She is an entertainer. She's a great business person. Her affair with the Kansas City Chief tight end seems to have a lot of people intrigued, but at least it wasn't just some far-out wacko like, oh, gosh, that person's undeserving.
Yeah.
I mean, it's glamour choosing transgenders, for example, as Woman of the Year.
It could have been worse. That's a good way of saying it. It could have been worse. But, Taylor Swift went after Marsha Blackburn, the Tennessee senator, for some of her positions on issues and totally mischaracterized them. I'm like, why do we care what Taylor Swift thinks about political issues? Like, maybe just be quiet and pick up the guitar. Like, that's probably what you should be doing. But anyway, I digress.
I hear you.
I came in hot on T-Swift. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
My daughter said, don't hate on Taylor Swift.
She's texting you right now. It's the T-Swift Accountability Board watching everything.
That's right. Well, thanks for coming on. Give us a brief update on what's happening down at the auditor's office. You know, I always tell you this. I want you guys to be the Maytag repairman. I want it to be uneventful.
The phone's not ringing.
Exactly.
That's my dream as well. We're not there yet, but maybe one day. Yeah, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about our legislative agenda for the year.
Please.
So that's been the big thing that I've been pushing these last 3 or 4 days, going all around the state. We've been to Meridian, Starkville, Columbus, Biloxi, going to Hernando tomorrow. Really, the big centerpiece of what I'm going to push in the legislative session this year is a Whistleblower Reward Act. And so this idea has been around for a while. Yeah. There's a law in the federal law that's very similar to this. And if you're a taxpayer and you come forward and you've identified that somebody in the federal government is involved in corruption, and the federal government recovers money from that case, you might be eligible to get a percentage of that recovery. And that, of course, encourages people to come forward with information about corruption. We don't have anything like that in state law, and I think it's time to change that. So I'm going to push for a state statute this year that creates a whistleblower reward. If you're a private citizen out there, you come forward and you tell my office about something you've seen involving government funds, so somebody stealing property or somebody stealing money. We investigate it, we dig in, and we realize you're right, and we get a recovery off of that. Under the statute I proposed, you would be eligible to get up to 15% of the recovery.
Okay.
And so we want to encourage people to come forward. I think if this passes, it could be a game changer in our fight against corruption. I think it'll encourage a lot of information to flow, give people an incentive to come forward with this kind of info. And I'm excited about it because I think it could be a really important step toward making Mississippi government a bit cleaner.
Yeah. I believe the IRS has had such a program for years.
SEC has, the False Claims Act and the federal law has. So there are a bunch of different whistleblower reward programs in federal law.
Okay.
But I think we need it for state and local government now.
Yeah,
I think that's the next step.
It's taxpayer dollars as well.
Bingo.
Yeah.
Bingo.
Totally agree. Okay. We were just talking before we went to break about these university presidents from MIT and Harvard and University of Pennsylvania.
Yep.
On the Hill yesterday, discussing the raft of anti-Semitism on their campuses, protests, blocking buildings. Students, Jewish students, have testified as well, indicating that they feel unsafe, they feel harassed, they feel the harsh treatment, not just from other students, but even members of the administration and faculty, which is unthinkable in my view. But they seem to avoid any direct answers to the questions. This concept of context, as we were talking about. Mm-hmm. What context do you need I guess, to frame these protests where they are literally calling for genocide.
That's right.
How do you contextualize that?
It's disgusting what they're saying. I saw those same clips last night, and I'm an alum of Harvard, obviously, and I hate to say it, but none of that surprised me. I mean, the clip was disgusting, but at the same time, none of it surprised me. You know, if you had asked those presidents, well, is there any context under which calling for the genocide of black folks in America
that
would be allowed?
Asked.
Yeah. I mean, the answer is obviously no. You should never call for that, and anybody who calls for that is ethically abhorrent, and also they're in violation of our student code. But then for some reason, if you call for the genocide of Jewish people, all of a sudden, well, it depends on how...
You've got to protect free speech.
It depends on when you said that and how you said it and all this kind of stuff. No, it's the easiest answer in the world. Genocide, calling for genocide is bad and should violate your student code. But let me just say this. There are some folks who are going to look at that clip and they're going to say, well, that's the Ivy Leagues. And it's no surprise that these elite institutions are crazy. I'm here to tell you that it is not limited to the Ivy Leagues. So you can look around the country, Arizona, Wisconsin, North Carolina, Michigan, bunch of different states. You have student groups who are saying the same exact things at public universities in those states that they're saying at Harvard and at Penn and at MIT. And the really frustrating thing for me is that at those public institutions, the taxpayers are financing the indoctrination. We are paying the professors to teach these kids to be crazy. They don't grow up this way. We're paying professors to teach these kids to be this way. And unless every state gets its head together and says, all right, look, maybe we ought to be spending money on the programs that actually educate kids and prepare them for a career as opposed to degree programs that are just there to indoctrinate the kids. Unless we do that, nothing is going to change.
It's an epidemic on college campuses. And we have shared countless stories of these activities and just the stronghold of this DEI ideology on college campuses. It's nuts. It's crazy. We shared one a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Auditor, the University of Nebraska. And they've got, remember this, Rhino, some sort of safe dressing room where you can, and this is taxpayer funded, of course, where students who are uncomfortable dressing in public in a way that they believe corresponds with what they think their gender is, especially agendered people, and they actually have this on the campus, and this is part of their DEI department and the funding there. So I just saw that there's an Ohio, this is just yesterday, an Ohio bill. Ohio State is requiring students, which one of the schools you've got to affirm your privilege, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It's part of the curriculum.
It's absurd, and they're paying for it.
And you're paying for it.
The taxpayers are paying for it.
Right.
And this really, it goes back to one of the 4 bills I'm pushing this year in the legislature. I've talked about the fact that we're spending, tens of millions of dollars on DEI, meaning me and you, the taxpayers here in Mississippi at our universities are paying millions of dollars on DEI. And we're spending money to finance degree programs that aren't creating students who are useful for our economy. A lot of times they're just indoctrinated to believe this crazy gender ideology or whatever it is. A lot of times they can't find a job here, so they go off somewhere else, so we don't get any return on our investment. So what I've called for the legislature to do is say, look, let's create a commission. Let's put some experienced economists, workforce experts, people who understand Mississippi's economy, and let's get them together. Let's have them make a recommendation about how we should be funding our degree programs at public universities, how we should be spending taxpayer dollars so that the dollars are going to degree programs that actually prepare people for jobs that are here. Now, if the universities want to raise their private dollars and they want to spend those private dollars on gender and zombies, which is an actual course you can take at a Mississippi Public University in the fall. Ryan is excited about that. Rhino is. But, I don't think we should be paying for it. If you want to raise private dollars to finance courses like that, go right ahead. But for our taxpayer money, I think we ought to be spending that on degree programs that actually prepare people for a job that exists here in the state of Mississippi.
We seem to have drifted away from the concept that the goal of an education at that level is to produce graduates who are ready to go to work and contribute to society.
We've forgotten it completely. Yeah, and the problem is we let universities on their own decide which degree programs are good or not, and then we just fund them. We just give them money. Well, and that's not the smart way to do it.
And as you know, the faculty has to sign off those majors.
That's right. And the degree programs and the courses, all of that stuff. Sorry to throw you under the bus, Rhino. I know you love zombies. I didn't mean to go hard.
We got Auditor Shad White in the Element Wealth studio. Stay with us. We're going to talk some more. Studio, it's State Auditor Shad White. So I think you make a good point that what's missing in this discussion of this explosion of DEI on campuses is that much of that, if not virtually all of it, is taxpayer funded.
Yep.
It's Ohio State. Rhino and I looked up the other day. We were talking about that a minute ago. 132 in their DEI department.
Yeah.
Here's what I think we need, Mr. Auditor. I think we need one person who is the administrator of exclusion. What you should be looking for is, hey, if somebody's being excluded, well, that's an issue.
I see what you mean, yeah.
But forcing inclusion just on the basis of physical attributes, not only does it achieve nothing, I would argue that the real people you're trying to persuade, I guess, and trying to encourage that might harbor some form of racism in their brain. I believe that's something that lives in your brain and in your heart. You can't just make some assessment without that. All you do is aggravate them and probably push them even further to that because they poke you in the eye with it all the time.
Well, and here's the stated goal of DEI. The stated goal of DEI is to make campuses more diverse. But what they're spending the money on, and it's our money a lot of times, like you said, what they're spending the money on is these teaching sessions and administrator salaries. So, for example, at one of our universities, they're hosting Pride Day with DEI money. They're hosting a session to read the teachings of Ibram Kendi. And if nobody out there has read Ibram Kendi, I would encourage you to not read it, but I have, unfortunately. And his teachings are based around this idea that the only remedy for past discrimination is present and future discrimination.
Right.
So they're using the money to teach an ideology, and we're paying for it. Now, if they really wanted to make campuses more diverse, just hear me out. I know this is crazy. Maybe we should use that money to give scholarships to poor kids. Wouldn't that be mind-blowing if we just use that money to give scholarships to poor kids, people that might not have an opportunity to go to college otherwise?
Yeah. I
mean, that's the sort of common sense thing that apparently you can't even say out loud now because this DEI religion is so sacrosanct on these university campuses that they have to spend their money on these administrator salaries and these teaching sessions. And it's just not right. It's not right when we have to foot the bill. That's the big problem.
The other thing that is of concern that I think you're aware of is grade inflation.
Yep.
Is a big problem. I had a story I shared a couple of weeks ago where a professor, I can't remember the school, but what the policy of this university was to adjust grades upward based on these physical attributes, based on this DEI ideology. Just you give this person, because of their race, their gender, their sexual preference, et cetera, a higher grade.
That is wild.
Refused to do that, and apparently the administration went into the grading system, the database, and adjusted the grades after he issued them.
That is wild. And that's, you can justify all manner of unfairness with his ideology. That's the whole problem, is if you have an ideology that's not based on fairness of treating people the same regardless of how they look or who they are, if you deviate from that, you're opening up this Pandora's box of problems. And we just don't need to walk down that road. We need to treat people decently regardless of what they look like, and we need to reward merit.
It's real easy.
If you can perform,
merit and performance.
You need to be rewarded. If you can't, sorry, figure it out.
Well, the problem, as you know, is you could look at statistics until you're blue in the face, of course, and so many statistics do show disparities. We ought to be talking about solutions to those disparities rather than just forcing society, like an instructor. You just give higher grades. Well, that's not solving the core problem.
No.
We want to know is why are they not performing as well as their peers of another race or ethnicity? Let's go address that problem.
That's right. That's right. Well, look, I'll throw one at you. I'll throw a solution at you. If you want to get at the core problem, you and I both know that one of the core challenges that we face as a state is we have a higher percentage of kids born into single-parent homes here than any other state in the entire country. And if you look, kids that grow up in a home without an engaged dad are 20 times more likely to end up in prison, 9 times less likely to finish high school, 5 times more likely to end up in poverty. And of course, when I've said this, one of the statewide Democratic candidates last time called me a big old racist for saying that.
Of course.
By the way, I'm just quoting a Barack Obama speech, so it wasn't racist when he said it a few years ago.
And I remember that.
So we know what the core challenge is. Kids grow up in broken homes, and they're not put on the path to success. So how do we address it? Well, look, we see some things that actually do help. One of those is the high school military program, JROTC. It's a great example. You pair up a kid, especially a kid coming from a broken home, with a military veteran. That veteran becomes sort of like a surrogate parent, a place-in parent for that kid. And then you look, magically, their performance gets better across the board. So Jackson's JROTC program, mind-blowing statistics on this. 100% graduation rate. The kids that come out of that program have a 100% high school graduation rate. That's compared to a 75% high school graduation rate for the rest of Jackson Public Schools. They have a 96% school attendance rate, which is much, much higher than the rest of Jackson Public Schools. They score on average 3 points higher on the ACT. The kids coming out of Jackson Public Schools JROTC program score on average higher on the ACT than the average Mississippi student, period.
Wow.
So we know when you inject mentors into these kids' lives at an early age, you can really address some of the problems downstream. But the answer is not to say, well, he performed a little bit worse on the ACT. Let's give him 3 extra points for fun. Because what happens is that person goes on and becomes a doctor and then puts the patient's life at risk when they're not trained properly to be the doctor that they should be.
Well, with this grade inflation, and in some situations, there are districts, certainly in the K through 12 space, that have adopted this concept of ungrading, where they don't assign objective grades anymore.
I haven't heard of this. This is baffling.
Oh, yeah. They're at San Diego.
Oh, man.
Las Vegas, Clark County, 5th largest school district in the country, just adopted this process.
These are K-12 schools?
K-12 schools. Ungrading. It's just whatever the teacher thinks, they just, boom, give them a grade. It's not based on your performance on tests, your completion of assignments, none of that.
That is just not the answer, because what you're going to end up with is kids who don't have to prove their aptitude in order to get into medical school, in order to get into engineering school. And so someday somebody's life is going to depend on their skill.
No doubt.
And if we have unqualified doctors who've never been assessed or have been given extra points on the test because of who they are, you're going to put a patient's life at risk.
I describe it as the march to mediocrity.
Yep.
And that's what it feels like. And it's so you said something about this a minute ago. We've gotten to this point where we attempt at least to attribute every disparity to some sort of racism or suppression. It's Ibram Kendi.
That's exactly
he
right.
basically says that. Well, no, if we got a disparity, well, then let's go figure out why that's occurring. You made a great point. We agree with you, by the way, Rhino and I do. We talk about it all the time. The dissolution of the nuclear family is the core cause of almost all of our societal problems, and it's irrefutable statistical fact, as you just pointed out. When you have a child that grows up in this stable home environment, this is how they perform. When they don't, and it's irrespective of their race,
that's exactly
honestly.
Right.
It just happens to be more prevalent in certain racial circles.
Well, and look back at the history of the United States. Back in the 1950s, the percentage of white women and black women who were married was about the same.
Right.
And then we as a government instituted the Great Society programs that were designed to alleviate poverty, but the problem is they made poverty worse. So back then, about 75% of black kids were born into a two-parent home. Today, it's down to 25%. So we created these government programs that created all sorts of horrible incentives for families, and all of a sudden, over the course of the past 50, 60 years, black families break up, and then we look up, and all of the problems of poverty seem to be worse. And we wonder, how did this happen? Well, we created incentives to destroy families, and the family is the way you put people, a stable family is the way you put kids on the path to success later on in life. So I really do think we have to get serious about addressing this, because this is one of our fundamental challenges as a state. We still have far too many people in poverty. In Mississippi, you can look back at the data. that poverty travels with families through generations, which is unlike some other states. We've got to get a hold on this, and it starts with the family. That's where it starts.
Completely agree. If you can hang around, we can talk some more.
Let's do
All
it.
right, we got a break right here. Auditor Shad White is our guest. Stay with us. So, Auditor Shad White is our guest. So, all right, so tell me again the name of this legislation that you're pushing for in the whistleblower legislation.
So we had, number one is the Whistleblower Reward Act to give private citizens a percentage of the recovery if they come forward with information about corruption. Other big one is create a commission to study how we fund universities to make sure that dollars are flowing to degree programs that actually prepare kids for a real job and not these indoctrination degree programs. Third one, we started touching on it a second ago, is JROTC. I mean, the return on investment in the high school military program, JROTC, is massive. So why don't we encourage kids to get in that program? Let's give them free community college or some sort of carrot to encourage kids to get in that program. It's going to do wonders for kids with who are coming from a broken home, from a tough environment. It's going to put a mentor in those lives. Those are big things that I think we can do that I'm going to be pushing for this year. And aside from the legislative agenda, I'll add one into what we were talking about earlier. You know, we talked about getting back to the family and talking about the importance of the family. And sometimes people will ask me, they say, yeah, we agree with that, but you can't force daddies to go take care of their kids. What are you going to do? Well, here's one thing that we could do. We know that if a kid finishes high school, gets a job, and gets married before they have a kid, there's a 97% chance that they will never end up in poverty. That's not me making that up. That's
statistical fact.
That's the Brookings Institution, a left-leaning institution that has studied this and said that's the sequence if you want to not end up in poverty. I think that every kid in a Mississippi public school ought to have to memorize those three things. Get a job, finish your degree, get married before you have kids. That would help solve our poverty problem if we mesh that information in those kids' brains so that when they wake up at 1 a.m., they can spout it off. You know, that's the kind of thing that we have to get back to strengthen the core institutions of our society so that we don't have problems downstream where kids are off on a bad road. They're headed toward prison or poverty or whatever it may be.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just wonder if that is something that we could require from a legislative perspective as part of our curriculum. Would that in any way conflict with federal standards, for example? I mean, it seems reasonable to me.
You know, I think if you can require In God We Trust to be on the wall, which is a great thing in our classrooms, you could require the success sequence to be on the wall. Well, that's my guess.
Yeah.
Make the Biden administration tell us no on that and see how it goes. We'll take them to court. Let's see how it goes.
I'm for it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's only an attempt to try to educate our most precious asset, which is our young folks, on the prospects for having most prospect for having a productive life. That's what it should be all about. We've got to get away from this just I got to have instant gratification today situation, because often that instant gratification, as you know, and whatever that benefit is to you, it causes problems down the road.
Yep, and we've got to get away as a society from praising victimhood. You know, that's the other big thing. It's like, oh, well, if you ended up in poverty, you know, this is the only way this happened is because of a series of unfortunate circumstances that were beyond your control. Yes, that sometimes happens. Sometimes people have issues. They have health issues, mental health issues, whatever. But we know, just to say it again, if you finish high school, you get a job, and you get married before you have kids, there's a 97% chance you're never in poverty. So I've had folks tell me, well, you can't say that out loud because people can't control that. Like, people can't control avoiding having kids before they get married. Like there's one thing that causes it, and you can control it. Hate to say it. Usually you can control it unless there's some sort of horrible crime, right? So we know that there are common sense steps that every person can take, almost every person can take, to make sure that they don't end up in a terrible position later in life. So why not tell kids what the steps are? Why not be transparent with these kids and tell them what they can do to lead life off on a good foot?
It makes perfect sense. And again, the statistics back this up. And these are statistics that have been in the process of just being gained, I should say, by sociologists and economists and others that have compiled all this data. None of this is inaccurate. I mean, this has been around for decades.
That's
We've
right.
known this.
That's
is
right.
not like we just woke up and realized, hey, yeah, this is the kind of the secret to achieving success in life. We've known this for some time.
Well, there's this Maryland economist who has a new book called The Two-Parent Privilege, and her point in this is that this is one of the most robust findings in social science, that a stable two-parent household leads to good outcomes usually in the long run. This is one of the most stable outcomes, one of the most robust outcomes across social science. And you hear folks on the left, they claim to be the side of evidence and the side of science, and then you look up and they don't want to hear this science.
No.
They don't want to hear this. You know, you could be a BLM protester and be protesting in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and that's okay. You know, we're going to ignore the science in that case, and social science we're going to ignore if it says two parents are good, but everything else we're all about. We love that science.
We've been accumulating this data for decades.
Exactly right.
It's not
exactly
anything
right.
that we just popped up and started analyzing and produced some white paper on. This has been going on
I'm
for a
glad
long
we have
time.
a member of the legislature here listening to my legislative agenda. This is great. This is a great way to start right here.
And about to be a powerful member of the legislature.
Yeah. I couldn't have picked a better
Not that he
one.
already isn't, but even more powerful. Appreciate you coming in, Mr. Auditor, and enjoy the conversation.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah, man. Coming right back, folks, in the Element Well studio.